O Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Take our minds and think through them. Take our mouths and speak through them. Take our hands and work through them, and take our hearts and set them on fire for Christ's sake. Amen. Well, welcome to Lent, the season in which we are challenged to strip ourselves of those things that get in the way of our experiencing an ever deeper relationship with God. We're invited to follow Christ into the thin space of the wildernesses of our lives, so that when the inevitable crosses of life loom before us, we have the strength and the fortitude and the trust to face them with grace. The 40 days of Lent found their origin in the early church. And during that period, people who were preparing for baptism entered into intense preparation for their new lives in ministry. And it was punctuated by their baptisms at the Easter Vigil. And Jesus prepared for his ministry for 40 days in the wilderness as well. The Hebrews prepared for their role as a light to the nations by wandering in the desert for 40 years. Now, we're offered several tools as Christians to enrich the season of Lent. There's charitable giving, prayer and fasting, or any kind of self-denial. And these may be the core traditions, but there are other disciplines which are popular as well, including study or service or even silence. We exercise these with intentionality during Lent in order to remind ourselves of our baptismal promises and to be in solidarity with those who are just now entering into that commitment of faith. But we also do it to further train ourselves to be more vulnerable to God's presence. You see, the danger is that, as we see in our readings, that each of our disciplines can be perverted and lead us away from a deeper connection to God and God's creation. Isaiah and Matthew drive this point home in our readings today. The author of the passage from Isaiah addressed a community of Jews who had been freed from captivity in Babylon and who were going about restoring Jerusalem and Judea to their former glory. But consequently, the prophet Isaiah reminded them of the inequitable characteristics of the temple system and the indifference of the elites to the plight of others that caused God's displeasure and their resulting exile in the first place. Their religious observances were not for the sake of the poor, as God commanded, but rather for their own self-aggrandizement and enrichment. And then Jesus, who followed diligently in the footsteps of Isaiah by reminding the religious elites of his day, the Pharisees, not to make the same mistakes by holding them to account. And he also made sure that he nurtured himself on his spiritual journey by repeatedly withdrawing to barren places for times of solitude and prayer. Now, our Lenten disciplines, including the imposition of ashes, must not be for the sake of showing our piety to others or even to ourselves. They're not the trappings of a competition. They're a means to help us discern privately and who and where we are on our journey of faith, so that hopefully we can shed those things that take us further from God and our baptismal promises. In his reflection on Ash Wednesday, author Sam Portero offers that quote, "The grit of the ash and the dusty, dusky dirt remind us of the possibilities and the limitations inherent in our human being. We are reminded of our own mortality, not that we might shrink in fear, but that we might recall the grace conferred in our human status and stature. We're reminded that we are created of God to be human, a reality forgotten and obscured by our headstrong striving for more and our headlong descent into so much less. We forget that we are in relationship. We do this most often in trivial Lenten habits and giving up of what for most of us is sheer luxury, or the embracing of the similar luxury of a little extra service to those that we ignore the rest of the year. And all for the vanity of our own spiritual health. The notion that Lenten practice is undertaken only for our own reformation betrays a blindness to the very relationship we acknowledge on this day. Living into relationship with God is the most profound of Lenten disciplines. Lent is the time for intentional work on relationship. Because in relationship, we share everything. And when we undertake our disciplines, our schemes of self-reformation or community transformation, we only reinforce the notion that we can go it alone and that it is all dependent on us. Withdrawing further into ourselves, we unwittingly deny the very thing we confess in wearing the ashes, that we are in desperate need of God and God's grace. We are all from earth, and to earth we shall return. So we are no different from any other members of society on this day. And consequently, the ashes that we shall impose prepare us for the joy of fully realizing the resurrection promised us by a radically inclusive Jesus, despite our best efforts to sabotage it. So today and throughout Lent, I invite you to join me and make your Lenten disciplines a means of getting closer to God and not proving something to yourself or to anyone else. See how difficult that is. Not only to give up sugar or alcohol or meat, or take on a more rigorous prayer life or a charitable project or whatever, but also give up on the sense of achieving anything. And when you feel tempted to judge your progress, give it right back to God and let His grace just embrace you and tell you that it's okay. Amen. So, dear people of God,